September 29th, the committee resumes its study on mental health and suicide prevention among veterans. For the first hour, we have Romeo Dallaire, retired Lieutenant General and Senator, here, and we have Scott Maxwell from Wounded Warriors and retired Brigadier General Joe Sharp. So we'll start off with a 10-minute witness statement, and then we'll go into a round of questioning. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for appearing today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for receiving me in these opulent surroundings that I couldn't find my way around the place. So I'm very glad for you, in fact, and it was high time that it be done, and so well done for bringing you the ability to work with a certain quality of life with your staffs to achieve your missions. I will read a short statement. I hope it's short, or I'll do like my Marine Corps friends have taught me. I'll power talk through that. And then my two colleagues here, Joe Sharp and I, were intimately involved in the writing of the Liberal Party policy on veterans and have been engaged with veterans for over 10 years in specifics and policy and also individual cases and the like. And previous to that, 10 years before that, with the Deputy Minister at the time, Admiral Murray, who had a advisory committee which was chaired by Dr. Neary, who wrote the book on the first Veterans Charter dated 1943. And so we spent 10 years working together on that multidisciplinary team. We're also classmates from RMC, but he passed. I
thought that was my line.
Yeah, okay. Scott Maxwell is the Executive Director of Wounded Warriors Canada. I am the patron of Wounded Warriors Canada, and by far, to me, the body of volunteerism and also of philanthropy that is putting so much of its capabilities into the field in the hands of those who are wounded, mostly psychologically, and I speak of programs like the animal assistance programs, the equine program, and also the veterans training program that we run out of Dalhousie University with My Child Soldier Initiative, where we train veterans to be able to go back into the field and serve in training other armies in how to handle child soldiers and reduce casualties on both the child soldier side and our side. And so they take a formal 1-month program with us at Dalhousie, and we can go into that as we go into the possibility of programs. I'm going to use as a reference, if I may, correspondence that I had with the Commander-in-Chief, and that is with the Governor-General. When I was a senator and in the post time, where I had a number of activities going on with him, and his wife also was quite involved in regards to the care and concern of injured veterans, and particularly psychological injuries, as he personally and she also are quite engaged in that side. And I want to use it to give you a feel from there as we move forward. And I'll start by thanking you very much for permitting me and my colleagues to join you today on this matter of suicide prevention in the Canadian Armed Forces and amongst our veterans who both serve in Canadian Forces still, and a large number do, and those who have been released and, of course, are in Canadian society. I commend your commitment to the welfare of these individuals and their families, and I am honored to share my thoughts on how we can make more progress in finding solutions to this problem of people killing themselves because they're injured. As I mentioned during other times, both publicly and in different forums, I, over years, had assembled a team of advisors from diverse backgrounds and with deep knowledge of both the forces and Veterans Affairs. This group of advisors worked to develop policy recommendations and advocacy tools that have allowed us to maintain a well-researched and well-informed outlook on the issues facing our military, especially those who have, in fact, taken the uniform off, on issues particularly related to operational stress injuries. And I emphasize that I'm not necessarily always touching on all of mental health. I'm focusing on the operational stress injury part. That is the crux of those who are injured. That is the heart of the problem. That's the operational deficiency that we are seeing right now. Some of those who are involved, just to get their names out there because they've been so committed, is retired Sergeant Don Hopi, Major Retired Bruce Henwood, Dr. Victor Marshall, Mrs. Muriel Westmoreland, and Gord Sharp here, and Christian Barabé, who have all been engaged over the years with me, bringing forward the Veterans scenario, and also helped me when I was chair of the Veterans Committee subcommittee in the Senate. Our research and thinking and work has led us to the conclusion that, in particular, OSIs, operational stress injuries, can be and is too often fatal for those affected, and that the consequences often last a lifetime for those who do not, in fact, succeed in trying to kill themselves. We've had in the past from peer support organizations statistics that were of the scale of peers being able to prevent a suicide attempt a day through the peer support program, let alone the more formal structures of the medical entries. This, of course, includes the devastating consequences on the families and those affected by OSIs. And it is my belief that a comprehensive approach, whole of government, engaged approach with society, can, in fact, bring significant solutions to this crucial aspect of seeing people actually destroy themselves, although we could have brought them to both meaningful progress and, in the long run, given them a decent way of life. Mental health in the forces, with the veterans in the forces, plus with the members of the forces, and it's a continuum that seems to be within also Veterans Canada, has been presented as a clinical matter. With very little involvement of overall command structure. That is to say, the essence of what people are used to living, their cultural framework, which is one of a command, chain of command, and structured, very structured way of life. The clinical dimension, the therapeutic dimension, the medical dimension has took over the problem of OSI, but took over also the potential resolution of conflicts that would bring people to ultimately destroy themselves, and it left to the sidelines the chain of command, so that it was impossible for the chain of command to know what was going on. They would get troops coming back to their units with no information on what their state of mind was because of confidentiality, because of not being able to work a way around the access to information or to, in fact, the individual privates' rights in regards to their individual rights and within the Charter. Using that to abuse has, in fact, disconnected the chain of command from the injured, which is totally contrary to everything that we've been educated on in command. I spent my life in command, from a platoon or a troop of 30 right to the 1st Canadian Division of 12,000, in peace and in war. The command is like being pregnant. You are in command all the time while you have a command function. It's day and night, and then when the baby's born, you're still there, just like in command. And so you cannot, but because you're in garrison and not in operational theaters, divorce the chain of command from the ultimate responsibility of ensuring the well-being of the individuals and the command structure to ensure that the families are integrated within that support. I state the families integrated into that support structure, not cooperating with the families, not assisting the families, not supporting, but integrated into the operational effectiveness of the forces. Why? Because the families live the missions with us. I came back injured. I was thrown out of the forces injured. My family was injured. It wasn't the same family that I had left behind, because the media make them live the missions with us. And so any of these policies, including from DND, Canadian Armed Forces, Veterans Serving, Veterans Out, and Veterans Canada, that doesn't totally integrate families, then you're going to end up with some of the statistics, although anecdotal still. And I was at the last Military Mental Health Research Forum in Vancouver, presenting a paper in which we're arguing that the stresses and strains in families where individuals are suffering from mental health and not getting the support needed to handle the family as well as the individual, what we're seeing is now teenagers pushed to the limit in these conditions of extreme stress, to them committing suicide. So we've not only the individual members, but we're now seeing family members who can't live with what they're seeing, and in fact, they are committing suicide. And so it is essential that we identify the early warning signs of psychological distress, that we encourage members to seek help through support programs offered by the military, by Veterans Canada, by outside agencies like Wounded Warriors Canada, by outside agencies like the Veterans Transition Training Program that we have, but programs that give them gainful employment close to, as much as possible, their background. Why try to convert completely a person when in fact you can build on a person? Why not find gainful employment in, around, surrounding, contractually or otherwise, veterans with what they have been growing up with, their whole loyalty to, and that is, in fact, the armed forces. The uniform is off, but we wear it underneath, and we wear it in our hearts. So why divorce them from that? Why not find programs, in fact, that bring you much closer? And so I'm going to curtail, because of time, my presentations only to indicate that there are initiatives moving forward. And certainly the 20 January 2017 CDS Strategic Initiating Directive of Suicide Prevention Strategy has got to be the best piece of work we've seen in a long time. And he makes it very clear that the chain of command is the essence of prevention. However, when you start reading the nuts and bolts, you will see that the medical people have put their finger into the pie, and they're, I would say, watering it down. And what they're supposed to be is supporting the chain of command, not creating for the chain of command, but supporting the chain of command. So I will leave you with these following recommendations so that there's enough time to speak. And my colleagues will amplify, of course, whatever, and they're free to respond to your questions. I hope you will feel at ease with that. First, the directive in the Canadian Armed Forces Directive on Suicide Prevention Strategy has got to be funded and implemented and validated. And if necessary, go to what we used after Somalia. Create ministerial oversight committees that report to the minister. And we did that for nearly 3 years. I was ADM PER at the time. And for 3 years, we had 6 oversight committees that reported every 2 months to the minister on how we were implementing this kind of stuff. And so there's nothing wrong with the political oversight getting closer to the actual implementation when you have a crisis like this. I think that the VACT, Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention Framework and Strategy, I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's written. It better be out there. And it is critical because they've got veterans that are outside of the forces, and they got a whole whack of veterans that are inside the forces. And that is critical and funded to be able to implement. The third leg of that strategic sort of focus is, in fact, what is called the Canadian Forces VAC Joint Suicide Prevention Strategy. That's where we want the two departments to come together. That's where they're saying they want the two departments. Certainly in the D&D one, that's what they articulate clearly, or CAF ones clearly. Haven't seen that one either. That one is going to prevent people falling through the cracks. That's going to permit the continuum. That's where the loyalty is not lost and that people will continue to commit. So that third strategy has got to be out there, implemented, evaluated, yes, but validated. 6 months down, 8 months down, and that validation has got to be of such a nature to hold people accountable. And that's why I come forward with, again, the recommendation that in these oversight committees by the minister, there's nothing wrong with bringing that online and helping you. Too very rapidly, I think that the recognition of operational stress injury casualties has got to be advanced in Veterans Canada to the level that we do with the 158 that got killed overseas, or any of our members who are killed in action. If we prove that it's an operational stress injury that has brought the death of that individual is part of the numbers. So we didn't lose 158. We're up to 200 and some odd now. So why not use that number? And imagine having somebody come back for 4 years and then lose them after 4 years of striving and working hard to try to hopefully save them. And then you lose them, and you get nothing of any great significance. You don't even get recognition apart from the medal. And I'm going to add the families, now that you've moved Veterans Canada into the Military Family Support Resource Centres, then move the families and help to the families through the Family Support Military Family Support Centers. Reinforce that capability. It's used to taking care of families. So let them take on that angle for both Veterans Canada and for CF, because they're already doing it. And lastly, give them gainful employment as close as you can to their history, to their loyalty, to the military or military milieu. Why try to change them at a time when, in fact, they're already in crisis? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll start off the first round of questioning, and I think we might have to cut questioning to 5 minutes each on each round here. We have 2 panels today. So we'll start with Mr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And General, thank you very much for your service, and thank you very much for your commitment to this very important issue. You're talking, and I'd like to just expand a little bit more, if you can, on the chain of command. Can you give us some suggestions on how you see we can juggle that challenge that the chain of command has? And really, your conversation today is probably the first time we've had someone here to our committee actually speak about how that conflicts, that change of command and the mental illness and the actual clinical presentation. Can you give us some ideas on how we can bring those two together?
And I'll let my colleagues also intervene. The first immediate response is that the chain of command must be informed. Confidentiality, no negating that. But you can't let people be handed over to another body, even to the joint support units that they were moved to, or sometimes moved back from the joint support units back to the unit, and the unit commanding officer, who's responsible for the life of those individuals in the field, is also responsible in command back home. And you can't just throw them back without giving them information. They have no idea how to handle them because they don't know the scale of the injury that the individual has. And unless there's a means by which we all have doctors in our regiments, in our units, the means by which those doctors can provide that input, and that input can be then moved down to the lowest level without, of course, offending, but on the contrary, reinforcing the individual's return. If you don't do that, you're just having a bunch of walking wounded in a unit, and people don't know what the hell to do with them, and that isolates them more, and that pushes them more towards wanting to maybe end it. Maybe.
No, I agree.
Thank you. Joe?
I would just repeat the point that General Dallaire made earlier, that this is a leadership issue, not a medical issue. And I think that is a refrain I would come back to over and over again. Barriers stovepipes, if I can use that term, create barriers to care. And that is a major concern here. Just to use the 2015 numbers, 13 of the 14 suicides in 2015 were in sought care within a year prior to committing suicide. 10 of them within 30 days of committing suicide. There's a leadership message here. We've had an opportunity, or there was an opportunity to intervene, and I think it's an information flow that creates that barrier. And it's very similar to the barrier that once a member transitions into Veterans Affairs, that's another stovepipe, and it's another barrier, and it's another obstacle to getting to the bottom of this.
We're hearing an awful lot about barriers, and that's the biggest thing, and there's a number of barriers. And here is another one that we see, or I'm seeing at least at this point in time, where that chain of command structure and how we, as a clinician myself, how do we make sure that I protect my Hippocratic Oath with the issue that has to deal with the chain of command. And so I appreciate your comments. General Dallaire, I'm going to, you very briefly touched on the issue of child soldiers, and very, very briefly, and obviously that's an important issue. And we were both at the CIMVR conference together, and at that conference I came away from that on the issue of a statement that resonates with me still to this day, and it's basically where we're looking at this. What happens to soldiers in oftentimes is this violent contradiction of moral expectations. And as we deal with the issue of child soldiers, which potentially we could be stepping into again, it's a huge conflict, I think, for a lot of our soldiers. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, because I know there's been a strategy that's been presented, and
Yes.
And you've been involved with that.
We've been working for 2 years with the Canadian Army in particular, and we have been working with NATO. We've been in Africa getting research, because my institute, the Romeo Dallaire Child Soldier Initiative, is based at Dalhousie University, and it's a research institute that is field-focused, and we train armies, we train police forces in countries to send them into conflict zones, and their military and police forces. And we were able to influence the content of the Canadian Army being the first army in the world to formally put into its new doctrine. And doctrine is a reference from which you deduce tactics, you deduce organization, you deduce equipment, you deduce the training that you need to do the job, to do the mission. And so by creating that doctrine, it is now leading the world in formally recognizing it, and we are going to start implementing the training of trainers to then bring that forward. Why is this doctrine particularly important? Is because there isn't one conflict in the world that is not using as the primary weapon system children. 9 years old, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. And every one of those conflicts create an ethical but really moral dilemma for the member. And that's what blows us farther. We always thought it was the ambush or the accident that was the hardest point. What's the hardest one is the moral dilemma and the moral destruction of having to face children. A sergeant came to me in Quebec City, where I live, looking good, talked, 5 missions, things were going well. I asked him what his job in the battalion was. He broke down right there in the middle of the shopping center. Couldn't talk, so stammered, weak knee, crying. I took him aside and so on. And he said, I was in the recce platoon, and my job was to make sure the suicide bombers didn't get to the convoys. And he said, I've been back for 4 years, and I still haven't hugged my children. We are taking significant casualties because we don't know how to handle child soldiers. This doctrine will move us a long way that way, and will be part of the training program.
Thank you. Ms. Lockhart?
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, generals, for your service and for being here today to answer our questions. I wanted to talk about a quote that I read from your book, Waiting for First Light. And you said, no one recognized what I was doing at the time, not even me. Nobody told me I was injured. I didn't think I was injured, though I felt the weight of having had to ask to be relieved of command. Outwardly, I was still committed, determined, stable. Inwardly, the stresses I was imposing on myself were beating me down, piling up on the stresses at work. My question to you is there something that Veterans Affairs can do to intervene at this point in a soldier's life, a soldier's mental state, that could prevent or stop the progression from this state to suicide?
You are facing with mental health, and particularly the operational stress injury side of it. You are facing an injury that gets worse with time. It's not like if you lost an arm, you know you lost it. So the aim is to try to build a prosthesis as effective as possible. If you don't intervene with the same sense of urgency with an operational stress injury, with someone who, by recognizing it first and then providing it, that gets deeper and deeper and more difficult to get at and to resolve. And so it took 4 years before I crashed. I lost one of my officers 15 years afterwards, and having been treated. And so there is a vacuum of how do you get at them, yes, in order that they don't continue to walk around as if they're not injured, without the stigma being there. And we thought we had broken the stigma by having a veteran army, veteran armed forces. And we did till not so long ago, where now we got a lot more non-veterans in there. And so we're living what we lived in the 50s. In the 50s, we had a lot of veterans, but we had a lot of non-veterans. And there were frictions between the two. You know, I wouldn't be injured like this. But we didn't recognize the operational stress injury, so those guys simply drank themselves to death or got out, and they were the rubby-dubs that died in the streets because we had abandoned them, except for the Legion, who did help a lot, but also a lot of alcoholism. But what we lack now is that ability to discern them early and to then follow it through in a progressive way. I mean, the first time I went up for treatment, I was given eight sessions. I've been 14 years in treatment. I still have a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I still take 9 pills a day. And what it does, it keeps me like that. But there are moments, like last week, my book was launched in French, and it was catastrophic. Writing those books is like going back to hell. There's no real value to me, but I hope it will be useful to others. And so you got to find a way, and it's the prevention of the injury getting worse, not just recognizing it, but it getting worse. And unless you get in there early, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I think there's two things. I mean, one of the things that there's two competing problems we feel and we see at Wounded Warriors Canada anyways. On the one hand, you have the frustration when you're talking to someone who's graduated one of our programs and you talk to them about their injury, and I just want to add to General's comments that the vast majority of injuries, when they're comfortable to tell us when they occurred in their mind, happened or due to an interaction with children in some way, shape, or form. Second, it's when that injury or when that action occurred to cause the injury, 8 to 10 years commonly before they sought or were receiving the help that they deserve. You can imagine a life like that, the family impact, 8 to 10 years before they were attempting to deal with their injury. And the second problem we see on the other side of it is when we always talk in writing about, well, come and get help, self-identify, reach out, peer-to-peer. The problem we're facing now is, I think because it's such a more commonly understood or a topic to be discussed and more comfortable to come and address it, that we are receiving more and more people seeking help. The problem now is if they come and programs like ours have wait lists for up to 2 years, we have a severe access problem in Canada. That is one thing, and it's very nice and all well if they come forward to seek help, but when they don't get it, you can imagine what that can do to their mental state and their overall health care and the impact on their family. So there's a lot at play here, and it's extremely serious.
Okay, thank you. I think that pretty much is my time.
Thank you.
But that was great. No, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your expertise and your candor because this is very, very important. We need to get to the bottom of this. We have heard so much in terms of information from veterans that is contradicted by experts or people from VAC or DND. and it's frustrating, and it renders our ability to do the right thing questionable. So I want to get down to some brass tacks. I was with veterans on the West Coast over the weekend, and they told me that, of course, they're masking and denying their injury, because to admit it means they're out. And they're on the outside of a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a family that they need to stay connected with. They also told me that members within the Canadian Forces, they're suicidal too. It's not just when they're thrown out, they're suicidal too. But all of that information is being managed, and they're transitioned out so that if they are going to commit suicide, they're not in the Canadian Forces. They're on the outside, and DND doesn't have to account for those deaths. All of this is frustrating, and I'm sure that there's various opinions on this, but the point is the trust has been broken. These were angry veterans, and they talked about the triggers, the mountain of paperwork, the fact that they were financially insecure. They left without pensions or financial supports, and they didn't know what to do, and they felt that the only way out was to end it all, that they were of no use to their families, and they were either hiding in somebody's basement or they were lashing out. So what do we do? It's a catch-22. How do we re-engage those veterans? How do we reestablish that trust? Now, General, you talked about this study. Is that study, is it available to us? The CDS study, the strategy you talked about, is that available to us? You also talked about things that should be happening in terms of mental health, and you don't know where they are. All of this sort of combines to make us wonder, what is going on? Where are the support services? And when can we expect that there will be a genuine response that meets the needs of these veterans? And I know that that's a lot, and there's not really a question in there, but please.
Brevity is not my strength either, so don't worry about it. And let me put it this way first. We have articulated, after years of working on it, that unless there is an atmosphere within Canada, Canadian people, which seems to be there, within government circles, and I speak of parliamentary circles, which seems to be there, but also within the bureaucracy, which doesn't necessarily seem to be there, okay, unless you feel a covenant, not a social contract, because that means you've negotiated stuff, just like the current Veterans Charter. I'm the one who, in a day and a half, pushed it through the Senate, and I've regretted it ever since, because it didn't reflect the 10 years of work we had done before. It was a bureaucratic piece to try to save cash, and it hamstrung the minister with all kinds of regulations. That is a new phenomenon in legislation. Before there weren't any. Now they're throwing a whole whack of them with legislation. And so that new Veterans Charter doesn't need a new one. It needs a significant reform. In there you will find, in the reform, a lot of the answers these guys and girls need in order to get the appropriate responses and a timely response. And until you hit that target that deliberately, you're going to have a problem. And the only way you can convince people to go that far is if you actually believe that there's a cradle-to-grave responsibility, not to the age of 65, not with a reduced way of life, but an actual covenant that they have committed themselves to the unlimited liability, they've come back injured, their families are being affected, some of them are dead, and their families are obviously affected, then you've got them for life. You don't sell that, then you will not gain their trust. And I'll tell you, it started right rotten with the Gulf War syndrome. We did everything to prevent them from getting anything. Every lawyer in town, every medical staff gave us arguments why we couldn't take care of them. And that undermines the operational commitment of individuals. Do I want to get injured? But it undermines also the families. And they're the ones that are creating a vacuum of experienced people because they're pulling their spouses out.
Yep.
Mr. Yolfison?
Sorry.
No, thank you. I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for for your service and for coming here today and talking about suicide. It's an important issue. We have something in common with that. I practiced medicine for 20 years. That is a problem in my profession. My medical school had 3 suicides in a 15-month period while I was a resident. So I'm sensitive to professions where this happens. Now, one of the things that we have in common is that there's a stigma involved in seeking out mental help. There's a place in hell for the person who said, "Physician, heal thyself." A lot of damage has been done by that attitude. Soldiers probably deal with that as well. But in regard, we do know that there's always a hesitancy to step forward. Stigma of being seen as weak, not having what it takes. Do you think the stigma of PTSD has improved in the military since the days when you were serving?
Yeah, and I'm going to let Joe speak more about that, but I wish only to indicate to you that I consider myself in because I have a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and I'm getting care, and I have some peer support, and I don't hide it. If you are a doctor who takes care of me because I got cancer, I talk about you. And I say he's a dummy, he's a very good doctor, I like him, and so on. We talk about those doctors. Why don't we talk about our psychiatrists and our psychologists? They used to in some of the films of the early 70s there, but we've got to make that just as honorable as any other injury. And making it honorable will destroy that stigma. But we are now seeing frictions on the stigma coming back, which we thought we had pretty well with a cultural change, which Joe will speak of, by the non-veterans who feel that in this very Darwinian, very visible type of people that military are, or any first responders, anybody in uniform, police, firemen, and so on, there's this inability to accept what you can't see, and if you can't see it, you can't accept why they can't be 100%. That you got to educate and train.
Yeah. I'll just add a very quick footnote to General Dallaire's comments. We were talking earlier today about a young soldier I was working with on Thursday of last week, a young corporal who was telling me very candidly that, and he suffers from PTSD and is being cared for. But he said, "Sir, you're hearing all the right words from the senior leadership in the organization, and it's an honest commitment coming from the senior leadership of Canadian Armed Forces." But he said, on the ground, this young lad is an infantry soldier who is in the process of being released. He said, "On the ground, sir," he said, "the sergeants and the warrant officers do not believe a word of that. To them, it's purely BS. And if you come forward in your platoon, in your company, and ask for help, you are a weak link, and they don't want you there." That's Thursday of this last week. This was described. So is the stigma gone? Absolutely not. The stigma is still there, but it's because we focus very, very strongly on changing that immediate behavior. If we caught you from a leadership perspective bad-mouthing these guys, we were all over you. So we worried about behavior. We didn't really focus at the belief level that we really needed to focus at, and ultimately to the cultural level below that. It's a long, tough battle to change the culture. And I think we were focusing on behavior, not beliefs and not culture.
And the only other point I'd add is, I mean, not from those still in the Canadian Forces, but those that have released and are forming that civilian veteran population. I think a little bit, the stigma, things have improved a little bit, just with comfort. I mean, they're obviously already out, so there's a lot less risk. But the comfortability to talk about their situation, their comfortability to put themselves out there in a very, very, very vulnerable position, often amongst their own peers. is happening. It's happening all across the country. As I mentioned earlier, our problem is expanding access to programs, not trying to find the ill and injured people to come into our programs. So I think that certainly highlights that there is some progress being made for those that have released and from the veterans in the civilian side of the world to come forward, put their hand up, and seek help. So there is a little bit of optimism there. The downside, of course, is we got to make sure we can help them when they come forward.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, General and Mr. Sharp and Mr. Maxwell, for being here today. I want to preface my comments by saying on Friday night in my riding of West Nova, I was at an event in support of the Military Family Resource Center at 14 Wing Greenwood, and it was an excellent event to bring both awareness to the issues of mental health and PTSD within our military and veteran community, and to raise funds for the Military Family Resource Center. So I was glad to hear you talk about how families can access Military Family Resource Center and how this should be expanded to include veterans' families as well. I wonder if you can expand on that. I know the good work that they do and how you see that actually taking place, how that would work within DND and expanding those services.
VAC has signed an agreement now with the Canadian Forces that we can take care. I say we. There you go. It's a proof, and that's after 10 years in the Senate. So that we can take care of veterans who are now no more in the service to their families, injured ones,
right?
Injured veterans. But I would consider that Family Support Center is one of those pivotal bridges that they can cross and, in fact, survive into a new world. The Family Support Resource Centers have a lot of these expertise and have access both provincially and locally, let alone within the military and within VAC, to influence the battle and get people more timely support. And so where they're hurting is that the money's not going there. So they can't hire. They can't get that special support. And the horrible scenario that I think is still unresolved is the fact that we are improving the individual members, the forces still serving. We're improving the case of the veterans who are out there with our different clinics and so on, but we're not improving the case of the families. Mm-hmm. So you got one half of the problem solved, the other half is not, and that half is hurting and is going to drag down everything you're doing that way. So until you look at the family as also deploying, I would argue that the days are now here where the family is part of the operational effectiveness of the forces and not in support of the operational effectiveness of the forces. I mean, they're Skyping them an hour before they go on patrol. So come on, how is it possible to disconnect them? And so if the family is intrinsic to the operational effectiveness of the forces, they should have access to the same level of care. That means, it means more money into VAC, more money into DND to take care of the families. Well, we're already transferring a whack of money to the provinces. What we're doing is we're telling the provinces we're going to clean up our own mess. We created these injured people. We're going to take care of them. We'll buy the resources from you, instead of simply dumping them and having that very serious disconnect.
Yes, Mr. Maxwell.
I think the other part of it, too, is if they're great hubs, they're physical locations, they're places for people to go and have that peer-to-peer support. The other thing, just to caution, though, is like anything, the issue is so vast and the scale is so large that not one agency, not one MFRC is ever going to be able to do this on their own. It's something we confront all the time at Wounded Warriors Canada. If we fund a program, if we make a $375,000 donation to a program to run the program across the country, that's wonderful. However, there's limitations in the ability to help people and get them all in. Same for MFRC. So one of the things we're working with, and we talk a lot in this space, is partnerships. Partnerships. We're working with Military Family Services, which administer MFRCs across the country, to allow MFRCs, if they identify a couple, in this case, so you're supporting families, to attend one of, let's just use our example, to attend one of our programs, then those costs are covered from the referral from the MFRC to a program administered by Wounded Warriors Canada. you can see how fast this would multiply and duplicate on a national scale. So you don't have this regionalized framework where something's very good out there and less so in Esquimalt or wherever the case may be. We really are got to focus on making sure that if we're having these discussions that its implementation is national, because that's where the population is. It's in every corner of the country.
No, I think you're right, and I appreciate that comment, but it's really important to recognize that in smaller communities, having this vehicle that can be the way to reach out in the community, a trusted facility like that.
And we wouldn't
is really
get them. I mean,
important.
let's face it. I mean, if we want to run a program, how do we identify the people that need help? We use the likes of OSIS. We partner with them. We use the likes of MFRCs. We partner with them. Military Family Services more broadly. You're absolutely right. It's about partnership and linking the information and the tools and ultimately the programs together. So if someone does walk in with MFRC and they could benefit by X program that might not be administered within that MFRC, then at least the MFRC is able to get them the program that they deserve to receive.
Do you see as well, if I can just, because I'm very limited for time, do you see as well, though, the importance of having the family involved and integrated into the mission is also in order to ensure that if there is an intervention, it perhaps is earlier on, because you've got somebody there who can maybe spot some challenges that this soldier is facing, and they're able to identify the problem earlier?
Mr. Fraser, you pulled one of the gems out of this. If the family feels that they are intimately engaged in the operational effectiveness of the forces, they will feel that sense of responsibility of hauling the member or helping the member understand that that's part of the exercise of that member becoming operational effective or being adjusted to some other worthy sort of employment. So right now you'll have members fighting their families to not get support, where if the family was integrated into the program, they wouldn't be able to do that. And in fact, they would be reinforcing each other to get that help. And so there's the ick. That's the crux.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Wagon-Tull.
Thank you very much for being here today. This is so helpful. And I want to focus specifically on the statement you made in regards to the first thing with the Canadian Armed Forces Suicide Prevention Strategy, to implement it with ministerial oversight committees. And you mentioned Somalia. Sir, I'm very involved with our veterans on the issue of mefloquine.
Oh, yeah.
And we are still hearing from the powers that be that it's only 1 in 11,000 that are affected. Our own Minister of Health has recently, as of February 22nd, written, with respect to the continuing use of mefloquine as a malaria prophylaxis, the department considers that the benefits of mefloquine outweigh its potential risks under the conditions of use described in the CPM. I'm hearing from veterans from Somalia, from Rwanda, from Uganda, from Afghanistan, Bosnia, that have been taking this, that make it very clear that they did not have the freedom of choice. Our allies, Germany, Britain, Australia, the US, have taken steps, and yet our government still doesn't recognize what happened in Somalia and is carried on. It's impacting suicide rates, and I know from what I'm hearing directly from veterans. Can you please talk?
I was a year on mefloquine.
Yes.
About 5 months into it, I wrote to National Defense Headquarters, and I said, this thing is affecting my ability to think. This thing is blowing my stomach apart. This thing is affecting my memory, and I want to get rid of it. At the time, the Germans weren't using anything. But then when we lost 2 people in 48 hours to cerebral malaria, they changed their policy. But I then got a message back, which was one of the fastest ones I've ever got back, which essentially ordered me to continue, and if not, I would then be court-martialed for self-inflicted wound, because that was the only tool there was. Mefloquine is old think, and it does affect our ability to operate. And those statistics to me don't really
accurate.
hold water. And even if it is, what if it's the commander who's affected by it, which I was at the time? And so my executive assistant kept an eye on exactly how I was handling that mefloquine. And so there are other prophylaxis that are much better. And just on the command side, let alone on our ability to respond to the very complex scenarios in which we find ourselves, when you're facing children and so on, and you've got seconds, nanoseconds, to decide whether you're going to kill a child or not to save other people, you want them, we don't want them to have any booze, yet we're still being affected by maybe a drug that is.
So what do you say then? We should be doing the studies to determine.
I say get rid of it and use the new stuff.
Thank you. That's the faster route I would love us to take.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I have time for another quick question?
Yep, 2 minutes.
Thank you. One of the groups that are helping Veterans Helping Veterans, talked about the need for us to deprogram. We program soldiers. I understand the fight, flight, the get out there. You think of the other person before yourself. You come home. You don't know how to sleep in a normal pattern, and yet they claimed that this could be reprogrammed, that you can recreate a proper sleep pattern, proper food. All those things are so crucial to health. I know that you've struggled deeply with sleep. Is this something that you see as an avenue that could be taken to help our soldiers and our veterans?
I'm nearly going to respond by saying read my book, but I'm not going to say that.
I haven't done it yet. Sorry, you can tell.
But
On the record.
I think the difficulty is the fact that when we come back, we're trying to go to sleep in a bed and in an atmosphere that is foreign to us. And it's foreign to us because I came back and the slaughter of 1 million people or so didn't count. I mean, I was back as Deputy Commander of the Army, and I was told, thank God you're back. Now you've had your time overseas. Listen, the priority now is the budget cuts. And it was as if it didn't have. So the disconnect of our ability to know that those people exist, know that we haven't finished the job, know that there's been horrible scenarios played out, and then we come back here and nobody gives a damn, and nobody really recognizes. We have a horrible time adjusting to the opulence and to the pettiness and to the nature of our societies. And what keeps us from being able to handle it is our fatigue, our inability to reason. And what does that is the lack of sleep.
Yeah.
And we can't get to sleep because this stuff keeps just haunting us and keeping at us. So if there are programs to do that, I know there's all kinds of initiatives, fine. But I would argue that we're into two major cultural frictions that are not easy to come to a sort of an arrangement with.
Thank you. Mr. Pertina?
General Dallaire. The problems that we deal with in the Veterans Committee, of course, originated with a period of active service, and so I was impressed with your notion of the joint suicide prevention strategy. Obviously, two different groups are going to have to be working together in order to solve the problems. What would you see in that joint suicide prevention strategy? Are there any guidelines that you're anticipating or in terms of that?
In 1998, when I was Assistant Deputy Minister of Personnel, or what do they call CMP now, or HR, I was able to work out a deal with the ADM, a chap called Wallace at Veterans Canada, to second a general to Veterans Canada and to create the first joint discussions together. Our computers weren't working together, nothing like that. We couldn't even talk to each other. And so we created just a simple office where people had the veterans files on the veterans side and they had the forces files on the other side, and a case would come in and they'd talk to each other and solve it. There's been a lot of enhancements there, but I don't believe that it's gone far enough. And I don't believe that people are comfortable by being handed over to another department. I'm glad it's in Charlottetown. People are still very human and very sort of non-clinical, as Ottawa would be. And so you're not treating it as a number, and I think that's okay. But the fact that it's a separate department, and the fact that you're being moved away, take my uniform off, but don't divorce me from the family. okay? Don't move me to somebody else who's got a different culture, who's got a different sort of maybe atmosphere, who's running from a different set of gears in regards to rules and regulations. And so I did promise, but I will say this. I think it is time that we look at those countries that have moved veterans, their Veterans Department, with the National Defense Department. They've got their budget lines and they've got their whatever structures, and they're not tripping over each other. But what it does is the client is not handed over to somebody else. The client's still in the family. And so you can do a lot of informal resolution. You can bring a different angle to some of the directives, and you can give more power, because of the Minister of National Defense versus the Minister of Veterans Affairs, more power to getting in cabinet changes done, I think, because it has a direct impact on the operational effectiveness of his forces. If you don't treat the injured veteran right, the guy and girl who's going over will realize that, hey, if I come back injured, I got to fight a second fight. And that's coming home and trying to live decently. And so if it stays within the structure, you can still hold people, be very candid, far more accountable.
Thank you. I wondered, going back to the issue of culture and stigma and so on, what role does a chaplain play in the...
This is, what a wonderful question. What a wonderful... We, at my Child Soldier Initiative, we discovered that the threat is obviously children. And during the last course that we ran last summer for 15 veterans who are going to be, and we've deployed already some of them to train in Kenya and with Somali people and so on, amongst themselves, those 15, two of them, during the discussions and the training they were doing, two of them came forward and said that they had killed children. They had never told that to the therapists, never told that to their family, never told that to anybody. But they told it to these guys around them because they were going to be involved intimately with children, and they had suffered and suffered that. So I think that the ultimate pursuit that you're looking for is engaging them in. Geez, my memory is shot for me. You take over.
Chaplain?
Yeah.
Chaplains. Oh yeah, the spiritual side of this thing. We've talked about the moral side. Our moral weaknesses come from the fact that we don't have a spiritual side left. Yet in theaters of operations, many of those countries still have a spiritual side. It's not purely religious, it's cultural and so on. And so if you don't have a spiritual side to fall back on, then you're falling into a vacuum. And that makes your recovery that much more difficult. So the Padres are very proactive and very effective, I think, in the field. And they are second chain of resolving problems.
Yeah, our national program director has just retired as a 25-year Canadian Forces chaplain with the Combat Engineer Regiment in Toronto, and through working with him with Wounded Warriors, I mean, I've interacted with a whole bunch of members of the forces that he's assisted over the years, especially at his Department of Dignity. I met dozens of them. And we were talking just about that question. What was it about Phil, in this case, that was so helpful? And it was just that play. It was almost within the regimental family, a place where if you didn't want to go up the chain of command, you didn't want to tell any of your superiors anything about anything because you just weren't sure how significant the problem was, or if it was even worth mentioning. It was a safe place within the regimental family to go and at least have that first point of discussion with someone who you weren't fearful of, or you weren't fearful of any repercussion for saying something or asking a certain question. And the impact of that was tremendous on on how that went for them from there on.
I take General Lillard's point.
Yes. I'll make one very quick comment on this one. A few years ago,
If you just could make that brief, please.
Yeah, I visited
Thank you.
a major Army base to interview the Padres about their role in dealing with PTSD and OSIs. 14 of the 16 Padres had been diagnosed with PTSD on that base. So if we're going to use Padres, and we need to, they're a critical part, we have to take care of the Padres as well. It's not a physician heal thyself approach.
They must carry a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Broussard?
5 minutes, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And General, it's good to see you again. We saw each other in Barrie at the opening of École Secondaire de Romeo Dallaire, and I know the students, staff, and the board members were thrilled that you took the time to be there for the opening of a school in your name, so thank you, sir. I want to...
Putting all my artifacts there, too.
I think I had to speak French the whole time I was there, actually. So I want to talk about transitional issues because, you know, we build our soldiers up to fight, but we don't sort of, for lack of a better term, break them down to re-enter into civilian life. And that the issue of transition has come up a lot during the testimony. In fact, the DND Ombudsman talked about a concierge service for those that are being medically released to make sure that everything is in place. In fact, this committee issued a report to Parliament reaffirming what the DND Ombudsman had suggested. So I want to ask, and I know, Scott, you were on CP 24 3 years ago, and the issue of transition was asked of you then. So in the short time that we have, if I was to ask all three of you, if you were to list 3 priorities in terms of what we need to do to help with the stressors of transition for those that are transitioning out of the military back into civilian life for the sake of their families, what would those 3 priorities be right now? Scott, if I could start with you.
I mean, I wholly support the DND Ombudsman's report and recommendations firmly. I've said that publicly for far too long, it feels now, going back to that time. And he's since obviously produced new recommendations.
And he refers to it as a low-hanging fruit.
It really is. I mean, one of the things about talking about this, and he also references, it's not necessarily a cost change. You know, it's more of a process change,
right?
Which is, I think, accurate. And if we can, you know, just even if you're going to have the 2 departments, so if it's not going to go the way that the general just you know, suggests, despite the fact that it maybe should go that way, but if it's not going to, we got to ensure that when they are leaving, when they are releasing from one department to the next, that everything that we can possibly prepare in advance is done so that transition is as smooth and soft as possible, because we know in working with this population that it doesn't take much for them to stop doing things that are going to be beneficial for the well-being, to shut down, to isolate from everything, including, you know, their own well-being. And we see it and hear it far too much we're an organization that looks at and identifies gaps and tries to fill them. One of the biggest gaps we see continuously is the release gap, the time between departments, where they lose their identity. Their identity is in constant struggle, and they just feel that they have to retell their story too many times to too many people who simply do not care enough to give them the service support, the process support that they're required, and that of their families, to help them deal with the questions that they're receiving at home. Okay, so what's next for you and us in our life? It's serious, and I think all I can say in short is adopt the DND Ombudsman's recommendations. I think they do represent low-hanging fruit, but I think it's very important basis which to start from.
Yeah, a couple of points I would make very quickly, very similar to Scott's. Close the gap, big deal. You've got to bring these 2 departments closer together, and I think we've got to stop removing the membership from the individual leaving. In other words, once you're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, you remain a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. What we do now is take the cards and cut them up and give them, you know, you're on your own, you're a different thing. So we got to remove that sort of transition shock of being rejected from the family, if I can use that term.
Right.
I think secondly, we have to reduce the bureaucracy, the complication of that process of transitioning. We're not going to another country. We're staying in Canada. We're simply transitioning to another government department, but the horrendous bureaucracy that surrounds that transition process is mind-boggling. If you're healthy, if you're ill and injured, it's a barrier that's almost insurmountable. And lastly, I would say remove all the barriers to that transition. Very seriously study what constitutes barriers to the member and to the member's family, and target those barriers and get rid of them. We don't need the complication that we have now.
General, last word to you.
Get out of the weeds and take a strategic perspective of it. And the strategic perspective of it is that if we inculcate in these people from the day they enter a sense of loyalty to their service. My dad told me I entered a service. He said, don't expect anybody to say thank you. Expect an interesting career. You'll never be a millionaire. In those days, said change your name to Dallards because Dallaire, you'll go nowhere. But anyways, that's changed. However, take the high road of remembering that loyalty does not disconnect because of the extraordinary experiences we live and with the interwoven lives that we live amongst ourselves, that it's there forever. That's the covenant. And so if it is a covenant, then get rid of these two ways of handling the same problem. I was a veteran serving. Then I was a veteran non-serving, went into a whole different set of circumstances. Not needed. And so part of the strategic perspective is looking at two departments with different regulations on helping the same person and the same individual during the same lifespan or nearly. And secondly, build not a new charter, but take, and this is very much, I've said it in-house and so on often, and we've said it, build one based on the covenant of a reformed charter. Get rid of so many of the stupid rules. And yes, I'll end by the following. It's going to cost you more. Well, when you look at the billions we spend in training these people, the billions we spend in equipping them, giving them the ammunition, the food, the medical supplies, the billions we use in getting them into the theater of operations and doing everything to reduce casualties and win the war, which we do in humongous amounts of money, and then the billions we spend in rebuilding the equipment and replacing the equipment and restocking ourselves, and then look at the amount of money we are actually spending on the human beings that have gone through it. It is the most gross disconnect that you can imagine. And so Veterans Affairs at $3 billion is inappropriate. It is absolutely inappropriate compared to the scale of the commitment we're doing in every other dimension except the actual human being. And there's the strategic position that should be taken.
Thank you, General. Thank you.
Ms. Matheson, 3 minutes.
I need so much more, but I'm going to.
So do we.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I want to go back and underscore everything that you've said because that's exactly what we heard. With you, Scott, and
Sure.
you, General Dallaire, you said that you were in this horrific situation and you came back to this superficial life where there was no understanding of your experience. How do we change that? How do we make sure that when that member comes back, that there is recognition of that experience and what happened out there in that deployment?
I think that the crux of that is particularly with reservists who are all over the countryside and often abandoned. And remember, this only gets more complicated when you're talking about reservists, and it shouldn't be, but it is. I think that it is linking them to family. That's your anchor.
Okay.
So he's a reservist who's single, his parents. They're part of the forces. If he's married, it's his intimate family or close family and so on, it's his children. Bring the human side back to these individuals so they can build on that and then work from there. And so many, we've lost a lot of people because they lost their families and there was nothing left. It wasn't just losing a job. They lost their families and they killed themselves because of that. Try to keep that fundamental element of our society with them and help them go through the years of difficulty of living with a person like that. So it's based on to be family, and the tool to make the family available is the family support centers. There are no better expertise than them.
Okay. Really quickly, because I have another question.
No, you can ask your other question.
Okay.
I was just going to say the one thing that General Dallaire has talked about often in relation to our work is that ensure that they never have to fight again. And I think that's such a powerful line that if they actually feel as though they're fighting again when they come home, to access everything that's available now to them and their families. That's a huge problem. So, when I talk about that feeling and removing that feeling, how do you do that? Well, how about starting by making sure that they don't have to fight again? for everything that they're entitled to upon return from deployment and service to Canada.
Okay, and you said something very important about they tried to save the cash, and I have that feeling over and over again, whether it is with the new Veterans Charter, with mefloquine, with the Gulf War Syndrome. This committee some years ago had a study of Gulf War Syndrome, and we had mountains of evidence that, well, it's all in their minds. It's not real. And yet we had veterans coming in without hair, with a very clearly disoriented perspective.
We could have given them $70,000 and add to that the fact that we recognize it's an injury. Even if we couldn't figure all the legality of it, and even if some of them are going to rip us off, who gives a damn? What it would have changed would have been the whole attitude that the troops feel regarding them coming back injured. And if you're undermining them getting injured, you're going to undermine our operational effectiveness and them taking the appropriate risks, and they're undermining the families of getting the ability to handle them when they do come back.
Yep, and the same feeling with mefloquine. I asked directly, were troops advised? Were they monitored? Did anyone take care to know what the effects of these drugs were? And the answer was no. But I asked if there was any repercussions for someone saying, no, I choose not to take this drug.
Yeah.
And it was, oh, no, it comes through the chain of command.
Yeah,
But
well, the chain of command will charge you because you're conducting, you're doing self-inflicted wound because you're going against medical advice that the chain of command has accepted.
even though
That
they
ends
were
our
guinea pigs.
time for testimony today. On this panel, we will take a short break. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank all three of you for your service, for what you've done for our men and women that have served, and 2-minute break, and we'll come back to the second panel. Thank you. Kathy Ryu, Communications Coordinator. So we'll start with 10 minutes of testimony or witness testimony. Romeo Dallaire is going to stay here, probably not to ask questions or answer questions. He just wants to see how the committee works together. So we'll start with our new panel. Thank you. And we could sit you, quiet, or we're going to sit you up beside my clerk here.
We worked together before.
And the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Dallaire, thank you for having invited us to appear. We know that the Canadian Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs already work to take care of the mental health of its members and to prevent suicide, and we thank you for your interest in going even further. For about 30 years, our association has been developing a suicide prevention strategy in Quebec. So it brings together researchers, clinical workers, citizens, bereaved family members, private, public, and community organizations. And we work in the areas of awareness raising, engagement, training workers and citizens. So as you can see, we're not necessarily experts in the military area, but the reason it's relevant for us to appear at this committee is because we have experience in advising stakeholders within society and developing prevention strategies in all kinds of areas. We do it with, for example, agricultural producers. We've done it with detention centers. So we do it in all kinds of areas. Now, how can we reduce the number of suicides amongst our veterans? We all know that there's no simple answer to this and that we have to act on many levels. The few things that we think are essential and that we would like to talk about are awareness raising, training, and the provision of services. So I'm going to start with awareness raising. And in other words, a change of culture, a change of attitude. There have been repeated awareness-raising campaigns, and thanks to that, attitudes about suicide have started changing, and attitudes about mental health as well. So there's less stigma, less taboos. 10 or 15 years ago, suicide was sort of considered as being a fate in itself or an individual choice, but it's no longer seen as that. This is a problem that we can prevent. People are talking about their mental health, and calling for help, calling out for help is seen as a strength. But there's still a lot of work to do, and that's why we're here today. We would have a few proposals to make with respect to awareness raising. We think that it's very important to work upstream. We have to make serving military members aware, raise their awareness. We have to make them aware of the risk of suicide. There are many initiatives that could be taken. For example, reinforcing cohesion around an individual who has experienced difficulties or has been set aside for one reason or another from their unit. There are messages that can be provided to the effect that taking care of one's mental health is just as important as taking care of one's physical health. And we also have to make people aware of the resources that are available. Also, we have to reduce the social license of suicide. There are some men who really believe in the traditional masculine role, and so the acceptability, the social acceptability amongst these individuals is stronger. There are therapeutic approaches that make the social license of suicide less, or that decrease the social license, and that increase the value of finding other ways to reduce suffering. And when one finds other ways to reduce one's suffering and accepting help, one can become a model for one's children and close circle. We are convinced that suicide must not be an option, whether that's individually or collectively, and that's why we underscore those messages in our awareness-raising campaigns. We also believe that we need to avoid glorifying people who have died by suicide because that can be contagious. And in order to avoid that, it's important to do awareness raising amongst the media as well. I know that's already been done, but that work has to be done over and over again because journalists are always changing. It's also important to make people aware, especially those people who are responsible for rituals when someone who has died by suicide. It's very sensitive. It requires a lot of sensitivity. But we have to make sure that the message is sent out that we need to be able to preserve the life of someone who is suicidal. And there are certain practices that can have negative consequences. For example, erecting monuments that are in honor of a person who died by suicide, for example. That can have a negative effect amongst veterans who are vulnerable to suicide and who've already lost their own recognition and their sense of value ever since their role changed. They may see suicide as a way of retrieving that honor and that value. And so we need to be able to take care of our military members and provide appropriate services. It's important to be able to acknowledge these members who have died, but it's also important to avoid glorifying death by suicide. When it comes to assessing services and training, it's important to understand people who are suicidal. Anyone who is suicidal believes that they are worthless, that their situation will never change, and that nobody can help them. So reaching for help, finding resources becomes very, very difficult. It's even more difficult when you're a man and when you believe in a traditional masculine role, because self-reliance is valued when you believe in that traditional role. You believe that you're alone in resolving your own problems. And so when you're experiencing more difficult circumstances and you believe that you're worthless and no one can help you, then all these challenges become even higher and more important when it comes to seeking help. At the same time, when someone is suffering, they also become quite ambivalent. There's a part of them that wants to stop suffering, and that's why, of course, they think about ending their life. But there's also a part of them that wants to continue living, and that's the part that we have to try and connect with. And that's the part that professionals have to try and connect with and foster. So when a suicidal person seeks out help and when they express their distress, that's the part of them that wants to live, the part of them that is reaching out for hope and help. For many military members and veterans, who are suicidal, we're often talking about men and their characteristics, the way they ask for help has to be taken into account. So they won't express themselves the same way. And so the way that services are provided must also be adapted. When a man believes in that traditional masculine role, research shows that that person is 5 times more at risk to attempt suicide than the general population. Within the armed forces, when there's a release for medical reasons, that's perceived as being a failure of the system. And the member who experiences it sees it as a failure. That perception becomes an obstacle in itself, because that member already feels ashamed. And transitioning to civilian life, transitioning from a military member to a civilian is a very critical moment, because at that point in time, they lose their united, strong network that they were a part of before. So it's a very difficult moment, and that has to be anticipated. It has to be supported. And so things like this consultation today, become very important. There are many services that are offered by Veterans Affairs Canada. We know that. However, are the professionals and the individuals involved appropriately trained when it comes to suicide prevention? Are they able to recognize and see the signs of distress and to act quickly and appropriately? For individuals, There has been training that has been provided in Quebec. There's a program that is called Agir en Sentinelle, being a sentinel for suicide prevention. And so any people who want to be able to play a role in their community or within their amongst their colleagues or amongst their peers can be proactive. They can accompany individuals to the resources that they need. The training of sentinels and the establishment of networks of sentinels is something that works. It's effective. And it already exists within some military communities. And that fosters a quick action and quick identification of the signs. Within civilian society, these sentinels need to be able to turn to someone, a resource person, in order to be able to play that role. And they need to be able to find quick access for the person who is suicidal. This kind of training is absolutely critical for professional health professionals, mental health professionals, and for our military members and veterans. A general practitioner or a nurse or a psychologist hasn't necessarily taken that suicide prevention training, but the training is available and it works. The suicide rate amongst young people went down dramatically in the early 2000s, and that's thanks to a national strategy. And therefore, we think that should be a cornerstone of any strategy for suicide prevention for veterans. So we think that there are three very important points that need to be underscored when it comes to establishing a strategy. General Dallaire referred to one already. It's very important that services be harmonized, whether it be to our serving members or to our veterans. That transition has to be done as smoothly as possibly, so that the suicidal individual who requires services and who has reached out for help and has found someone to help them and accompany them doesn't have to change then the person they are consulting, doesn't have to change the team that is treating them and tell their story all over again, whether that be just before a suicide attempt or after. So we think that the operational stress injury centers should be merged, the ones that are for serving members and for veterans. Oftentimes, veterans actually go back to their original team from when they were in the armed forces because that team is important to them. Social support is also very important. General Dallaire referred to it. So the support of families, the support of peers. Social support comes from people supporting their members, and it should be a part of any services, health services that are provided. Men often turn to their spouse. Oftentimes it's the only person they turn to for emotional support when they're not feeling well, when they're experiencing difficulties. There may be a separation, and that is on top of the problems that they're experiencing, whether it be alcoholism or addiction. And so what that means is that there's a lot of pressure on their close family members, and it becomes even more important to remember that and to take that reality into account when you're trying to support their recovery. The armed forces are a family. They're a solid family, a large family, and every member feels that they can support on the other for their survival. So how then can we make sure that that strength and that mutual assistance can continue after they are released for medical reasons? The third important point is prevention on the internet and online intervention. More and more people are using various platforms to communicate their suicidal tendencies and their behavior. It doesn't just happen amongst young people and isolated people. It's happening more and more, and we think that there has to be a suicide prevention strategy that has an internet component to it so that we can put out prevention messages, identify signs, and intervene online. In conclusion, an effective suicide prevention strategy has to include the following elements. It has to include everyone involved, all actors. There has to be leadership, commitment, and training at various management levels throughout the chain of command. There has to be specific training for suicide prevention amongst professionals and people who are working with the individuals. There has to be a sentinel network, strong social support. There has to we also have to value reaching out to help so that the culture and attitudes change and so that people are more aware of mental health issues and the services that are available. We also have to be careful about messages and rituals that don't increase the social license of suicide. There has to be adequate funding for these measures, and obviously there has to be accessible care and care that is tailored to the clients asking for it. Thank you very much.
We're going to have to shorten them to 5 minutes each. I'm sorry about that, and we'll start out with Mr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and merci beaucoup, Mademoiselle Rioux.
Thank you very much. Ms. Basque and Ms. Rioux.
This is the limit of my French, so you both said something that sort of I caught an ear on from both of you individually, and I've got a very short period of time because I'm going to share with Ms. Wagenthal. So, Ms. Rioux, you commented on avoiding glorifying death by suicide. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
Can you all hear me? Yes? Well, when we're talking about glorification of death by suicide, what I'm talking about is if someone chooses that way to end their life, they may be honored in some way afterwards. They'll be recognized in some way after the fact. And we think that that can end up, you can pay tribute to the person, but you have to separate that from the fact that they committed suicide. People shouldn't think that if they decide to commit suicide, they're going to be honored in other ways, or even more so than someone who may have died for other reasons, for example, a heart attack. So these things can be contagious. We don't want other people to be copycats and end up trying to get that recognition from society and from the armed forces by doing this.
There's that stigma. I mean, I guess there's that challenge, the disconnect between there's a stigma for someone that's maybe attempted to take their life because of depression situations or whatever they might be. And that often gets labeled. Someone says, okay, you're not worthy of anything. And so I sort of trying to wrestle with that with your comment about glorifying it and whether someone actually would look at glorifying that. But I appreciate your comments. Mademoiselle Basque, suicide prevention training, you talked about that. How expansive is it in your organization? How extensive is it?
Well, it's a very important part of our organization. Our association develops training products along with its partners, and it has some important partners, for example, the Ministry of Health and Social Services in Quebec, and it also works with other organizations that have expertise in this area. So we look at how we can use research to provide our citizens, for example, and professionals with training so that they can play a role in preventing suicide. Our association has approximately 20 training products right now. We have trained more than 19,000 people who work with clients. We've helped develop clinical tools. We've helped develop various other products. There are about 75 factors associated with suicide. Some are more important than others. And some we may see intensify when someone is thinking of committing suicide. And so we provide people products and ability to recognize things, for example, ambivalence and other signs. And we provide people with expertise in helping people reconnect with their reason to live. We also have the Sentinel Network because there are people who can be responsible within their immediate community, but they should have tools so that they also can be familiar with the resources and recognize signs and accompany someone in distress to those resources. So we have very complementary training products that are available and that help tighten that safety net.
I'll ask a quick.
50 seconds.
Sure. As you know, we've recently brought into law in Canada an assisted suicide, assisted dying legislation. And since then, 800 individual Canadians have chosen that route. I was very concerned with it coming into play with that very thought of our veterans, our soldiers, who feel that life isn't worth living anymore, looking to seeing that as an affirmation. In the work that you do, are you seeing a difference at all in a response to this?
Well, for medical assistance in dying, that's what it's called in Quebec. It's a little too recent to be able to say, but we did participate in the consultations when our legislation was being developed a few years ago at the National Assembly, Legislative Assembly. We wanted to express our concerns about how that might lead to more social acceptability or license for suicide. So if there's someone who feels they're at the end of their life, if they're feeling that their life has no value, is worthless, and therefore they'd like to be able to request medical assistance in dying and trigger their own death, well, we can understand why people may want to be able to use that measure. So our concerns were about how we can help someone who is vulnerable, who is suicidal, and who thinks that they're suffering, feels that their suffering is intolerable. What can we do to provide them with the services that they need and that they have a right to? Let's say they're depressed, for example. What can we do without, while avoiding a request, for example, for medical assistance in dying? So we're very concerned about that, but it's much too recent to be able to document it for now.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you. You spoke quite a bit about training. So with respect to veterans, who should we train? Well, healthcare teams should be given specialized training so that they know how to appropriately deal with requests for help from military members. They need to know how to use specific clinical tools, and they need to ensure follow-up and access to resources for veterans. Now, we referred to these Sentinel networks. Those could also be used. Sentinels have to be adult, yes, and volunteers, but they also already have to be in a role that the individual in question trusts, so that these people will confide in them and tell them about the difficulties they're experiencing. It can't necessarily be the healthcare team. It has to be people who are part of the circle around our military members, who are able to have access to that individual, even if they're not necessarily experts. I mean, just to draw a parallel here, we train Sentinel networks in Quebec, and we developed products for our agricultural sector because there are producers who are isolated and more remote. They're not necessarily part of a network, but they are part of a circle. And so we need to train those members. These are the people that we trained as sentinels to be able to reach out to our producers. So there could be a similar system for our forces members. So these should be people who are in touch with them regularly, and they could be identified. Who do these people come in touch with and in contact with on a daily basis so that they could confide in them if they want to? So if you take the sentinels and you take training also for workers, professional workers, then the two become very important in accompanying that suicidal individual. So family members could be trained as well. Is that what you're saying? Well, yes. If the family itself doesn't already need those services and doesn't need to be accompanied, because close individuals themselves need help. They need to have access to that help. So they can't be acting as sentinels when they themselves are experiencing difficult family circumstances, because their needs are already acute. They need to be able to take care of their own family members, and they have to be able to support their spouse as well. So we try to avoid training close family members when they are experiencing themselves difficult circumstances. Obviously, at other periods in time, it could be helpful. You spoke about avoiding glorification. Earlier, the general was saying we should be taking into account or counting those people who are committing suicide. How do you reconcile the two? Could you just repeat that question so I make sure I understood what you were trying to say? Well, we want to avoid glorifying suicide, obviously, but we also want to be able to recognize our members. They have to be recognized and acknowledged, but we don't want to glorify them. How do we do that? Well, obviously, they have to be recognized as victims, as people who were in combat, and it's difficult. It's a complex area. But what we're saying is speak to experts. Take time in developing what you need to do. In Quebec, for example, there are researchers who work within the Army who are specialized in this area. We don't necessarily have all the answers for you. What we're saying is that it's important to take these things into account and take the time that you need to go in the right direction so that you avoid this glorification. Obviously, you have to document the number of suicides amongst veterans and members, for example, so that you know what you can do, what you can do better. But what's important is to not send out the message that when someone commits suicide, you're sort of paying tribute to the way they ended their suffering. You have to be able to point out what that individual should have had, or what an individual should have, so that they don't act on that suicidal impulse. And this is a concern in all areas. When there is a suicide, you have to work with peers, with the communities that experience the loss of that individual. And so we're always concerned about the way in which that is done. Because when a community loses someone they loved, they want to pay tribute to that person. But at the same time, you can't glorify the way that person died. That can become greater than the individual themselves. So it's important not to highlight the way in which they died.
Mr. Chair,
You'll have to make it very quick. We are running on past here.
The option is, before they commit suicide, is to have a system of recognizing them as being injured honorably. Mm-hmm. If you have a solid way of showing that they've been honorably injured, just like we take care of the guy and girl who's lost an arm or a leg, if they feel that they've been honorably recognized that way, then you've got an equilibrium of those who simply have gone the other route. But if you only try to recognize them because they've committed suicide, I agree entirely with them. So the onus is on the pre-recognition of an honorable injury that they've received and that we've treated them honorably and that their regiments and so on do so. Then you've got a balance that's established.
Thank you. Ms. Matheson?
Thank you, and I'm glad that you made that point, General de Dallaire, because PTSD is an injury. It is an injury that has debilitated a veteran in some way. I wondered, you talked about people in combat suffering this injury, but we know that PTSD can strike those who are not in a combat role. And I'm thinking particularly of a statistic that we received from Stats Canada, that survey, 2016 survey, that found more than a quarter of all women in the military reported sexual assault at least once during their careers. And so I wonder, have you looked into military sexual assault? And it's not just women, it's men too, as an underlying issue in regard to PTSD in that non-combat or not necessarily combat situation.
To my knowledge, that hasn't really been documented as a sort of cause-effect area. Now, without wanting to take away from the importance of sexual assault, I mean, it's absolutely horrible amongst women and amongst men. However, it's important to not make people even more vulnerable than they are already. And so let's say that they're experiencing distressing circumstances. It's important to be sensitive, because suicide is complex, and there are many factors that make people vulnerable. There's not always one unique reason or cause that can be attributed to suicide. Now, but I can't tell you whether there's been any research into suicide amongst military members and sexual assault.
Mental health workers play a more central role during the transition of a veteran. Would a stronger presence of mental health workers make that transition easier and underscore the value of the veteran and the recognition that their mental problems are understood and that there is compassion understood by DND and VAC.
Ce qu'on propose, c'est vraiment que ce
Well, what we're proposing is that it be the same healthcare team following the serving member and Veterans Affairs. So following their release, that it be the same team following them. And of course, that would help with the transition. And what it means is that there wouldn't have to be a transition, actually, because it would be the same healthcare team following them, because it would be the same individual whose needs are evolving. And they're still fragile. So it's important that if they've reached out for help, if these men have reached out for help, that assistance be able to continue and that they continue to be able to build on the trust that has been developed.
Heard over and over again how important families are to the overall well-being of the veteran. I wonder, to what degree does your organization interact with family members? And I'm thinking about not just how they support and help the veteran, but how they survive themselves. Previous testimony was that there's an increase in suicide among the children of veterans, and that is very, very troubling. So my question again, how do you interact with families?
Well, our association doesn't actually provide the services themselves to individuals who are ill. We have prevention strategies, but we work with partners who provide those clinical services. For example, suicide prevention centers. So our own expertise obviously takes these things into account. For example, we changed in Quebec. We changed our intervention methods in Quebec a few years ago to we used to think, erroneously, that an individual who wasn't going well should be able to reach out or call themselves. However, there's no research that shows that recovery will be any better if that person asks for help themselves. So from what we know about suicide, it's actually not appropriate as an assumption. And so we adapted our services that are provided in order to receive requests from close family members as well, and to be able to support those close family members. So if someone is concerned about another individual, that those services be provided, whether it be by suicide prevention centers or other teams, that they need to take that into account now.
Ontario, you have to reach out for help yourself. Family can't do it for you, and it's extremely frustrating. I wondered, you talked about the tools and the outside agencies, and we've also heard that there's this real sense of the military family. Are you finding...
We will have next Mr. Fraser. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for your opening remarks, and especially for appearing on such an important topic. Your information will be very useful for the committee. You spoke about the importance of families and close circles in these situations. Could you tell us a little more about how we can intervene earlier in these kinds of situations with families and close circles? How can we connect these people or connect with them earlier? Well, suicide prevention involves everyone, including close family members of the suicidal person. And these people show signs of distress quite early on. We don't always see them, but they're often different signs. And when you put all those pieces of the puzzle together, then you can gain an understanding of what that person is experiencing, what their needs are. And so there are signs that can be seen, and close family members can have that kind of information. So they can also have information about what might help them get through these situations. So these are important when it comes to helping make these members stronger, make these family members and close circle stronger. They need to know that there are services available, that there are projects or rather phone lines available. And they are available for family members and for individuals. Oftentimes people are concerned, they're being vigilant, hyper-vigilant. And so it's important that these people have access to information that they need so that they themselves can be guided by professionals. It's also important to intervene afterwards. So if you're going to have a strategy, you have to think of what you're going to do after someone has committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide. You have to be able to help bereaved family members. So there are things that we could do at the level of suicide prevention that will help the family members, as well as after the death of someone. So it's important that these people be involved in the process then. The earlier you could intervene, I would expect, the better. Yes, absolutely. On another topic then, Ms. Basque, I believe you spoke about online services. In your experience, do people in crisis use online services if they're not willing to use other communication tools, for example? Now, it might be something a bit new for some veterans. However, do you think that is a modern method of communication? Do you think there are individuals who may only want to use online services? Yes, there have been experiences everywhere and experiments everywhere in this. I would say we're actually lagging when it comes to this, because some research and experiences show us that you can reach out to different clients. These are people who wouldn't necessarily go in person to speak to someone. They wouldn't necessarily pick up a phone to ask for help. So we were saying this earlier, that there may be people who are more isolated. Young people, for example. Young people don't really use their phone much. And so other ways can be used to interact with them. Texting, for example, in chat rooms, for example. So in other countries, they're using other ways to make that contact. You can make that initial contact, and you don't necessarily have to pick up the phone to do that. You can do it remotely as well. It's less intimidating for some individuals to communicate, and they can decide how long it's going to last or how often they're going to communicate. There's a center in Quebec that is actually looking into this specifically. So I think this is something that's worth examining, but we are really behind. We're behind this actually within civilian society as well. What has to be done is to provide the services that suicidal individuals need where they are. So if they're on the web, then we have to reach out on the web. If they're at the end of the line, then we have to be able to pick up a phone. If they're in an isolated physical area, but they're in touch with someone once a week, well, then that's the individual that who has to be vigilant. And when someone has committed suicide, oftentimes it's talked about over the internet. They talk about the death of that individual. They express their distress and their upset. And so this can be very, very upsetting amongst individuals. People often don't know what to do. So we could also be doing something online to help family members or close circles identify people who are suicidal. Thank you very much.
Testimony today. I do apologize that we did run out of time. I'd like to thank you, your organization, and both of you for all you do for our men and women that have served. And also, if there's anything that you would like to add to your testimony, if you were to send it to the clerk could get it to the committee. With that, I will adjourn for 1 minute sharp, and we have about 5 minutes of committee business. I apologize to the committee that I do have to keep you after. So everybody that needs to not be here can leave, and we'll start the committee business in 1 minute. Thank you.